According to Rome's own foundation myth, twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, sons of the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia and the war god Mars, were set adrift on the Tiber River. Rescued and suckled by a she-wolf on the Palatine Hill, the twins grew into leaders of a refugee band. When they quarreled over where to establish their city, Romulus slew Remus and founded Roma on April 21, 753 BC. Though largely legendary, this story encapsulates key themes: divine sanction, the importance of the Seven Hills, and the violent origins of Roman authority. Archaeological evidence in the mid-8th century BC shows small hilltop settlements and Bronze Age fortifications across the Palatine, Capitoline, and Esquiline hills. These proto-urban villages, inhabited by Latin-speaking shepherds, Sabine hill people, and Etruscan traders, gradually coalesced into a nascent city that blended cultures and dialects. By the late 8th century, pottery shards and hut-urn cemeteries reflect growing population density and intercommunity trade along the Tiber. Romulus, if historical, instituted Rome's first institutions. He divided the population into 3 tribes, Rams, Titis, and Lusres, each split into 10 curiae, or wards responsible for religious rites and military levies. The curiae, rather than family clans, formed the basis of the comitia curiata, an assembly empowered to ratify laws and elect kings. Romulus also established the Roman Senate, initially a council of 100 elders or patres, drawn from leading families to advise the monarch. These bodies created an early constitutional framework where power remained both personal and collective. Under the succeeding kings, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, and the Etruscan Tarquins, Rome further matured. Numa Pompilius embodied religious innovation. He organized the priestly colleges, pontiffs, augurs, officiales, and established the Vestal Virgins, embedding piety into civic identity. His reforms included the Roman calendar, dividing the year into 12 months and coordinating festivals for gods such as Janus, Quirinus, and Vesta. Tullus Hostilius refocused on martial expansion, absorbing neighboring Alba Longa through the legendary clash of the Horatiae and Curiatiae. His militaristic angle underscored the monarch's role as commander-in-chief or imperator, responsible for raising legions drawn from the curiae. Ancus Marcius balanced war and religion, securing the salt marsh port of Ostia at the river mouth and extending Rome's sacred boundary to embrace new suburbs. The last 2 kings, both of Etruscan origin, presided over a more urban and cosmopolitan Rome. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus promoted monumental building. He drained the Forum marshes, built the original Circus Maximus for chariot races, and constructed Rome's first sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, reflecting Etruscan engineering prowess. His wife, Tanaquil, exemplifies early queenly influence, training her husband's successor by reading omens. Lucretia's father-in-law, Tarquin the Proud, completed the majestic temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on Capitoline Hill, symbolizing Rome's growing prestige. However, his leadership style of favoring his Etruscan kin, bypassing the Senate, and executing political rivals provoked elite outrage. The rape of Lucretia by his son Sextus Tarquinius and her subsequent suicide galvanized Roman nobles. In 509 BC, Lucius Junius Brutus led an aristocratic revolt, expelling the Tarquins and abolishing the monarchy. Thus ended Rome's regal era. Over nearly 250 years, Rome evolved from hilltop hamlets into a unified city-state under kings who blended Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan customs. They established foundational institutions: the Senate, curiae, priestly colleges, and codified religious rituals. Their urban works, the Forum, Cloaca, and fortifications, laid a physical and civic infrastructure that allowed the succeeding republic to flourish. From Romulus's tragic fratricide to Tarquin's fall, the monarchy period forged Rome's identity as a city under divine favor, yet wary of concentrated power. The transition to the Republic in 509 BC reflected the value Romans placed on limited executive authority and collective governance, principles that would guide their expansion from a compact city to the great Mediterranean empire centuries later. The overthrow of the Tarquin monarchy in 509 BC inaugurated the Roman Republic, a mixed constitution blending monarchical, aristocratic, and democratic elements designed to prevent any one individual or group from seizing unchecked power. Executive authority was entrusted to 2 annually elected consuls, each wielding imperium, that is, the command of armies and the right to convene the Senate and assemblies, but obliged to consult one another and subject to veto or intercessio. The Senate, originally a council of 300 patrician elders, controlled finances, foreign policy, and religious oversight. Its decrees shaped Rome's strategic direction. Meanwhile, the Comitia Centuriata or Century Assembly and Comitia Tributa or Tribal Assembly elected magistrates, passed laws, and tried certain judicial cases. In the Republic's early decades, patrician families, descended from the original Senate, monopolized magisterial offices. Discontent among plebeians, that is, artisans, smallholders, and merchants, sparked the conflict of the orders in approximately 494 to 287 BC, a protracted struggle that generated Rome's hallmark institutional innovations. The innovations included the tribunes of the plebs, which were plebeian magistrates with sacrosanct personhood and veto power, the plebiscitum or plebiscites passed by the plebeian assembly, eventually binding on all Romans, and the codification of law in the 12 Tables in approximately 450 BC. By the end of these struggles, wealthy non-patricians could access the consulship, and the Comitia Centuriata and Tributa acquired full legislative authority, balancing patrician privilege with broad civic participation. Meanwhile, external threats and opportunities drove Rome's early expansion across Latium and beyond. The Latin League, originally a defensive coalition of nearby hill towns, clashed with Rome in the Latin War between 341 to 338 BC. Rome's victory dismantled the League, absorbed its territories, and granted varying degrees of citizenship to its former allies, laying the groundwork for the Roman Federation. The Samnite Wars between 343 to 290 BC against the dominant mountain tribes in central Italy tested Rome's military adaptability. The repeated defeats at the Caudine Forks in 321 BC led to tactical reforms, including stricter discipline, the Manipular Legion, which were flexible infantry deployed in 3 lines, and the systematic use of reserves. These legions, organized by property-based centuries and led by consular imperators, began fielding up to 30,000 men per campaign season, backed by allied contingents. By 264 BC, Rome had subdued Etruria to the north, captured the wealthy Greek cities of Campania to the south, and forced Samnite submission. It also established a string of colonies, Luna, Cosa, and others, that secured strategic passes, river valleys, and coastal bastions. The Republic's combination of civic institutions and military innovation proved remarkably resilient. No single campaign ever summoned the entire Roman citizenry, enabling Rome to prosecute multiple wars simultaneously. This period also saw the flowering of Roman identity. The censor's moral oversight, the ludi or public games dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, and the collegia or religious guilds that reinforced social cohesion. Wealth from conquered territories funded monumental projects, such as the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill and the Via Appia, Rome's first major road in 312 BC. These investments in religion, infrastructure, and colonization underpinned a remarkably stable, yet expansive polity. Thus, by the outbreak of the First Punic War in 264 BC, Rome had evolved from a small hilltop city into the hegemon of peninsular Italy, governed by a balanced constitution that blended popular power with aristocratic guidance and an army forged in constant conflict. The Republic stood poised to challenge Carthage for Mediterranean supremacy, confident in its institutional checks on ambition and its proven ability to integrate new citizens and territories into an ever-expanding commonwealth. By the outbreak of the First Punic War in 264 BC, Rome's centuries-old citizen-soldier ethos was poised for a revolutionary transformation. For generations, Roman consuls had raised armies each spring from property-holding citizens, farmers, and artisans ranked in centuries by wealth, who served under imperatorial command for a single campaign season before returning to their fields. Yet waging war across the sea against Carthage, Rome's equally formidable rival, demanded sustained military commitments, naval innovation, and logistics on an unprecedented scale. During the First Punic War, Rome's initial lack of naval experience spurred the Senate to authorize the rapid construction of a quinquereme fleet modeled on a Carthaginian wreck recovered off Ostia. Roman engineers added the corvus, a pivoting boarding bridge with a heavy spike, which neutralized Carthage's seamanship advantage by letting legionaries fight hand-to-hand at sea. From Mylae to Ecnomus, Rome's navy held its own, but the extended blockade and maritime campaigns drained the treasury and exposed crews to storms and disease. When the consuls finally compelled Hamilcar Barca to sue for peace, Rome's indemnity and Sicily's annexation as the Republic's first province marked a turning point. Maritime power became a permanent element of Roman strategy. 2 decades later, during the Second Punic War from 218 to 201 BC, Hannibal Barca's audacious crossing of the Alps laid waste to Italian consular armies at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and the calamitous Cannae. Facing this existential crisis, Rome adapted by refining its legionary structure. Manipular formations coalesced into cohort blocks with standardized equipment, and commanders received wider tactical autonomy. Crucially, Rome compelled its socii, that is, Italian allies, to contribute troops under Roman legates, ensuring manpower pooled against the invader. Meanwhile, Fabius Maximus's cautious Fabian strategy of delay and attrition slowed Hannibal's advance, giving proconsuls like Scipio Africanus the stage to take the fight to North Africa. The climactic Battle of Zama in 202 BC not only avenged Rome's earlier losses, but also concluded the war on terms that stripped Carthage of its fleet, overseas territories, and independence in foreign affairs. Freed from Carthaginian threat, the Republic turned its attentions to the Hellenistic kingdoms. A succession of Macedonian wars between 214 and 148 BC, and the Syrian War against the Seleucid Empire between 192 and 188 BC, saw Rome deploy multi-theater armies. Cohorts under Scipio Aemilianus defeated Perseus at Pydna in 168 BC, while Flamininus proclaimed Greek freedom at the Isthmian Games, cementing Roman influence. Provinces of Macedonia and Asia emerged, each governed by proconsuls wielding both civil and military authority over diverse Hellenic populations. By the mid-2nd century BC, the demands of far-flung campaigns had sown the seeds of a professional army. Long deployments abroad persuaded many landless citizens to enlist for regular pay, bonuses, and eventual citizenship grants, benefits that bound their fortunes and loyalties to their generals and to Rome itself, rather than to their rural homes. This shift accelerated with the Marian reforms of 107 BC, which formalized recruitment of the Capite, that is, headcount poor, and standardized weaponry and training, transforming the legions into a disciplined, standing force. Across these wars, Rome also honed its provincial administration. Conquered territories were organized into provinces, each overseen by a proconsul responsible for tax collection, justice, and defense. Roads, like the Via Appia and Via Egnatia, spanned the Mediterranean rim, linking garrisons to the capital and facilitating troop movements. Colonies planted former soldiers as landholders, Romanizing local elites and securing conquered regions. By 146 BC, with Carthage razed and Corinth sacked, Rome stood unrivaled across the Mediterranean. Its legions had evolved from a seasonal militia into a semi-professional army capable of sustained operations far from home. Yet this remarkable expansion also laid the groundwork for social and political strains. Ambitious generals commanding loyal veteran cohorts, vast war booty altering traditional wealth structures, and a republic increasingly stretched to its organizational limits. Dynamics that would soon propel it toward the crises of the late Republic. By 146 BC, Rome's meteoric expansion across the Mediterranean had created unprecedented wealth, but also deep social fault lines. The spoils of war, land, slaves, and bullion, flowed into the city, enriching a narrow elite of senatorial and equestrian families. Meanwhile, veteran soldiers, dispossessed by long service and unable to reclaim their farms, clustered in Rome's crowded streets or on the vineyards of wealthy patrons. As provinces multiplied, the Republic's traditional checks and balances frayed under the weight of continual military emergency. The first major symptom was the land question. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, elected tribune in 133 BC, proposed redistributing public ager publicus, that is, state lands held illegally by many nobles, to landless veterans and poor citizens. His Lex Sempronia Agraria would cap individual holdings and commission land allotments in Italy and the provinces. In bypassing the Senate and appealing directly to the tribal assembly, Tiberius inflamed aristocratic fear of popular mobilization. When he sought a second consecutive tribunate in 132 BC, he was slain in a senatorial ambush, Rome's first political assassination. His younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, broadened reforms, subsidized grain for the urban poor, extension of citizenship to Italian allies, and establishment of colonies in Carthage and Corinth to settle veterans. Gaius also created juries drawn from the equestrian order to curb senatorial corruption. Yet his triumphs provoked fierce backlash. In 121 BC, the Senate invoked the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, that is, final decree, ordering Consul Lucius Opimius to see that the Republic suffer no harm, effectively authorizing summary execution of Gaius and thousands of his supporters. These events underscored the Republic's constitutional crisis. Popular tribunes claimed direct mandate from the populace, while the Senate wielded extraordinary decrees to suppress dissent. Into this breach stepped Gaius Marius, whose successive consulships would radically transform Rome's military and political landscape. Facing the migratory pressure of the Cimbri and Teutons in Gaul, Marius undertook sweeping military reforms. He enrolled the Capitensi, that is, propertyless citizens, into the legions, standardizing equipment at state expense and promising land grants upon discharge. This professionalized the army, creating units whose loyalty was personal to their general rather than to the Senate or the Republic. Marius's victories, Aix, Acquisextii, and Vercelli, saved Italy from invasion, but his slaughters in the provinces fueled brutality and empowered his legions. His repeated consulships, unprecedented for a new man, alarmed conservative senators who saw in Marius a dangerous model of personal rule. The next flashpoint came in the social war between 91 and 88 BC, where Rome's Italian allies revolted for full citizenship. The Senate's intransigence prompted a widespread armed uprising, even as Marius's lieutenant, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, reclaimed senatorial dominance through force of arms. In 88 BC, Sulla was appointed to lead the Mithridatic War against King Mithridates IV of Pontus, but the popular tribune Sulpicius Rufus transferred the command to Marius. In response, Sulla marched on Rome with his legions, the first time a Roman army entered the city to settle a political dispute. This Sullan march inaugurated a new era, civil war as a tool of power politics. Sulla crushed Marius's faction, enacted proscriptions, that is, lists of enemies of the state whose property was confiscated and whose supporters could claim blood money for their heads, and in 82 BC, assumed the dictatorship. His constitutional reforms sought to restore senatorial primacy. He increased the size of the Senate to 600, curtailed the power of the tribunes, and reasserted cursus honorum, that is, political career intervals to prevent rapid accumulation of offices. Yet Sulla's settling of scores and reliance on personal armies had shattered the old norms. Though he resigned the dictatorship in 79 BC and retired to his estate, the precedent of generals seizing power by force endured. The resulting legacy, professional legions loyal to their commanders, proscriptions as political weapon, and institutional manipulations of Rome's magistracies, paved the way for the final collapse of the Republic. By 82 BC, the Republic had been reformed, but at the cost of unleashing civil violence as a constitutional instrument, setting the stage for Caesar's ascendancy and the end of republican governance. In the wake of Sulla's dictatorship, Rome's political order remained brittle. The First Triumvirate, an informal alliance between Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Julius Caesar, formed in 60 BC to advance mutual ambitions. Pompey sought land grants for his veterans. Crassus coveted tax-farming profits. Caesar, as consul, secured governorships of Gaul and Illyricum. By bypassing senatorial authority, the triumvirs cemented new power structures. Caesar's Gallic Wars between 58 and 50 BC provided not only vast plunder and extension of Roman dominion to the Rhine, but also built fierce loyalties among his legions. His commentaries, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, underscore both his military genius and political narrative. While Caesar subdued Gaul, Pompey wrestled with mounting crises in the east, and Crassus perished at Carrhae in a disastrous campaign against Parthia in 53 BC. With Crassus gone and the Senate fearful of Caesar's growing clout, the order to disarm and return to Rome without his army in 49 BC was tantamount to a death sentence. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River precipitated civil war. His subsequent victory at Pharsalus in 48 BC over Pompey, who fled to Egypt and was murdered, left Caesar supreme. As dictator, first for 10 years, then for life, he initiated sweeping reforms. The Julian calendar standardized the year, colonies settled veterans, and senatorial rolls were replenished with his allies. Yet his accumulation of power alarmed a faction of senators who feared the birth of monarchy. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by senators including Brutus and Cassius. invoking the libertas of the Republic. Instead, his death unleashed another cycle of civil wars. The Second Triumvirate, comprising Caesar's heir, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, emerged to avenge his murder, enacting proscriptions and dividing the empire's provinces. Lepidus was soon sidelined. Tensions between Octavian and Antony, who allied with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, dissolved the coalition. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet under Agrippa crushed the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Their subsequent suicides in 30 BC left Octavian unchallenged. In 27 BC, he carefully relinquished his extraordinary powers to the Senate, which in gratitude conferred on him the title Augustus, which means the revered one. Though ostensibly restoring republican institutions, Augustus retained imperial imperium proconsular powers over the provinces, control of the legions, and religious authority as Pontifex Maximus. Augustus's constitutional settlement, that is, the Principate, masked autocracy behind republican forms. The Senate resumed its legislative functions, and magistracies were filled through elections. Yet Augustus alone commanded the Praetorian Guard, held tribunician veto, and determined appointments of provincial governors. By fusing military command, civil authority, and religious sanctity in the person of the princeps, Augustus ended the Republic and inaugurated 2 centuries of Roman imperial peace. Augustus's reforms established the groundwork for the Pax Romana, a period of relative stability, prosperity, and expansion lasting approximately 2 centuries. After Augustus came Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, whose misrule culminated in revolt and civil war. The Senate then endorsed the army's choice of Vespasian to restore order, founding the Flavian dynasty. From there, Rome entered its true golden age under the so-called 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. These emperors mastered the art of adoption succession, selecting capable heirs rather than relying solely on bloodline, ensuring relatively smooth transitions and preserving competence at the helm. Under Trajan, the empire reached its maximum territorial extent with the annexation of Dacia, that is, modern Romania, and campaigns in eastern Mesopotamia. Monumental public works such as Trajan's Forum and Market and Hadrian's Wall in Britain testify to the era's confidence in imperial power. Administratively, this era saw refinement of the Roman legal system, the spread of Latin and Roman citizenship, and a professional civil service housed in the Curia Julia and specialized imperial departments. Trade thrived along maintenance-funded roads like the Via Appia and sea routes policed by the classis, while grain dole systems stabilized urban populations. Culturally, Greco-Roman art and literature flourished. Virgil's Aeneid under Augustus projected Rome's divine destiny. Seneca's Stoic treatises and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations epitomized philosophic ideal. Pliny the Elder's Encyclopedic Naturalis Historia compiled knowledge of the known world. Public spectacles, gladiatorial games, chariot races at the Circus Maximus reflected imperial munificence and social cohesion. Though occasional revolts and the Antonine Plague posed challenges, the 5 good emperors maintained a balance between the army's prestige, the Senate's dignity, and the people's welfare. With Marcus Aurelius's death, however, the model of capable adoption gave way to dynastic heredity under Commodus, ushering in increasing instability that would later engulf the empire. The death of Marcus Aurelius marked a turning point. The reign of Commodus degenerated into extravagance and autocracy, eroding the Principate's moral authority. The ensuing year of the 5 emperors and Severan dynasty failed to stem the tide of military interference in succession. By mid-3rd century, Rome faced multiple simultaneous threats: barbarian invasions across the Rhine and Danube, the Sassanid Empire's resurgence under Shapur I in the east, rampant economic inflation spurred by debasement of coinage, and the plague of Cyprian, decimating the populace. This era's hallmark was the revolving door of emperors, over 50 in a single century, most rising by military acclamation and falling to assassination or civil war. Provincial usurpers like Postumus established breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene realms. Urban life sputtered as civic funding collapsed and curiales, that is, city councilors, abandoned their posts to evade crushing tax burdens. Legions, once a source of Roman identity, splintered into personal power bases for ambitious generals. Amid this crisis of the 3rd century, Emperor Aurelian briefly restored unity, defeating the Gallic and Palmyrene secessions and rebuilding Rome's walls. Yet lasting stability arrived only under Diocletian. Recognizing that the empire was too vast and fractured for a single ruler, Diocletian instituted the Tetrarchy in 293, which saw two senior emperors known as Augusti and two junior co-emperors known as Caesars, each overseeing a quadrant of the empire. This collegial system aimed to ensure rapid response to frontier invasions and orderly succession. Diocletian's reforms extended beyond power sharing. He overhauled the provincial structure, multiplying provinces and grouping them into dioceses under vicars to improve fiscal and judicial administration. He separated civil and military authority to reduce the likelihood of a usurper's rise. To counter inflation, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, attempting to cap costs and wages, a measure that largely failed but underscores the era's economic desperation. Diocletian also revitalized the imperial cult, promoting the emperor's godlike status. Elaborate court ceremonies, imperial purple robes, and the title Dominus et Deus, which means Lord and God, emphasized autocratic rule. He relocated the eastern court to Nicomedia, and his co-Augustus, Maximian, to Milan, reflecting shifting strategic priorities. By 305, when Diocletian and Maximian voluntarily abdicated, a first in Roman history, they left an empire structurally reconfigured to respond to the multifaceted crises of the later age. The Tetrarchy, though short-lived in practice, set in motion patterns of divided rule that would characterize the imperial period ahead. The 4th century marked a turning point in Roman history, the elevation of Christianity from a persecuted sect to the empire's official religion, and the formal division of Roman authority between East and West. These twin processes, driven by emperors seeking unity and legitimacy, reshaped the empire's political, cultural, and ecclesiastical foundations. When Constantius Chlorus died in 306, his son, Constantine, seized power in Britain and Gaul, contesting rivals in a series of civil wars that culminated at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312. According to Christian sources, Constantine had seen a vision of the Chi symbol and the words in hoc signo vinces, which means in this sign you will conquer. Whether literal or retrospective propaganda, the emperor's subsequent favor toward Christianity was unmistakable. The Edict of Milan in 313, co-issued with Licinius, granted all religions, especially Christianity, toleration and restored confiscated church properties. Constantine's policies fostered rapid institutional development. He convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to resolve the Arian controversy over Christ's divinity, establishing the creed that remains a cornerstone of Orthodox belief. He founded Constantinople on Byzantium's site in 330, endowing it with senatorial rank and monumental churches, notably the original Hagia Irene, signaling that the eastern capital would be both imperial and ecclesiastical hub. Church and state merged. Bishops gained imperial audiences, clerical privileges were codified in the Codex Theodosius, and the clergy assumed roles in social welfare, education, and local administration. Yet Constantine's reforms introduced tensions between Christian and pagan traditions. He retained the title Pontifex Maximus, high priest of the pagan state cult, while hosting Christian bishops at court. He continued to sacrifice for the welfare of the empire, perhaps viewing Christianity as one among Rome's civilizing cults. Only gradually did emperors cease pagan rituals. Theodosius I famously closed the Temple of Apollo at Delphi in 390 and enacted the Theodosian decrees banning sacrifices, closing temples, and outlawing pagan festivals. Under Theodosius I, Christianization became uncompromisingly official. Following his victory over the usurper, Eugenius in 394, who had briefly permitted pagan restoration, Theodosius convened the Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople in 381, expanding Nicaea's creed and affirming the Holy Spirit's divinity. He declared Christianity the sole religion of the empire and personally presided over public penance for Gothic settlers who sacked Thessalonica in 390. Bishops ascended in political influence. Ambrose of Milan excommunicated Theodosius after the massacre of Thessalonica, demonstrating ecclesiastical authority over the emperor. Concurrently, administrative realities drove a permanent east-west division. Diocletian's earlier tetrarchy had established separate praetorian prefectures. Constantine reunited the empire, but maintained two capitals, mediating between Latin West and Greek East. On his deathbed, Theodosius divided the empire between his sons. Honorius inherited the West, with court at Ravenna, and Arcadius the East, based at Constantinople. Although legally one empire, each half developed distinct languages, Latin versus Greek, legal codes, Western Codex Theodosius versus Eastern adaptations, and ecclesiastical hierarchies, Rome versus Constantinople. This division proved enduring for administrative efficiency. Each emperor confronted different pressures. The West faced Gothic incursions from 376 onward, while the East contended with Persians and internal court struggles. Councils, theological schools, and monasticism flourished in the East in places like Antioch and Alexandria, while the West's church structure centered on Rome and Milan. Over subsequent decades, these divergent developments hardened into separate Byzantine and Latin cultural spheres. Christianization's social impact was profound. Church councils legislated charity for the poor, clergy staffed hospitals and orphanages, and the ecclesiastical calendar structured civic life. Pagan elites either converted or retreated to rural strongholds, preserving traditional cults until the 6th century. Latin and Greek biblical translations spread literacy beyond the classical elite, while Christian art replaced classical mythological themes with biblical iconography. By AD 395, the Roman world had transformed. From polytheistic empire to Christian commonwealth, from a single Mediterranean polity to two interdependent halves. Constantine and Theodosius's reforms laid the institutional groundwork for medieval Christendom and the Byzantine polity. The polity that emerged shaped the religious, cultural, and political map of Europe and the Near East for centuries to come. By the late 4th century, the Western Roman Empire was beset by both external pressures and internal decay. When Emperor Theodosius I died in 395, he divided his realm between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, creating two administrative centers, but failing to address the deeper institutional crises. In the West, the real power increasingly lay not with figurehead emperors, but with military strongmen and court factions, while barbarian groups pressed relentlessly on imperial frontiers. The first major shock was the Visigothic migration of 376, when the Goths, fleeing the Huns, petitioned to cross the Danube and settle within the empire. Mistreatment by Roman officials led to open rebellion under Alaric I. In 410, after years of campaigning across Italy and repeated sieges, Alaric's forces sacked Rome itself. Though he sought ransom rather than wholesale destruction, the fall of the city, long thought impregnable, shattered Roman prestige and signaled that the invincible city was no longer sacrosanct. Meanwhile, the Huns, under the relentless leadership of Attila, ravaged the Danube provinces, devastated Gaul at the Battle of Chalons in AD 451 under combined Roman and Visigothic forces, and looted northern Italy in 452. Though Attila withdrew after negotiations mediated by Pope Leo I, his campaigns revealed the Western Empire's military vulnerability and deepened political fragmentation. Provincial governors, often of barbarian origin themselves, acted as quasi-independent warlords, keeping legions to defend their own territories rather than the empire as a whole. The Vandals in North Africa delivered another catastrophic blow. Crossing from Spain in 429 under King Gaiseric, they conquered Carthage by 439, establishing a new Vandal kingdom that severed Rome's vital grain supply. Their naval raids sacked coastal Italy, culminating in the infamous Vandal sack of Rome in 455, which stripped the city of treasure and further demoralized its inhabitants. Loss of Africa deprived the West of its economic lifeline and exacerbated fiscal collapse. At the highest level, emperors became increasingly puppet figures manipulated by powerful generals. Flavius Stilicho acted as regent for the youthful Honorius, defending Italy against Goths and Alans. After Stilicho's execution in 408, driven by court intrigues, his removal unleashed factional violence and emptied the field of capable Roman leadership. Constantius III briefly restored order in 421, but his death months after marrying Honorius's sister, Galla Placidia, left no stable succession. By the mid-5th century, the last effective general was Flavius Aetius, who in 451 checked Attila at Chalons, but failed to secure lasting imperial cohesion. His assassination by Emperor Valentinian III in 454 eliminated the last bulwark against both barbarian invaders and court conspiracies. Valentinian himself was murdered in 455, and the throne changed hands rapidly among child emperors and usurpers until Romulus Augustulus was installed by his father, Orestes, a Romanized Pannonian commander. Orestes' refusal to grant land to his Germanic troops prompted his son-in-arms, Odoacer, leader of Herulian and Syrian federati, to revolt in 476. Rather than proclaim a new emperor, Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, sent the imperial regalia to the eastern court in Constantinople, and declared himself Rex Italii under nominal allegiance to Emperor Zeno. The Senate in Ravenna acquiesced, effectively bringing the western imperial line to an end. No Roman emperor would again sit in the west, though the title persisted in eastern imagination. This collapse did not occur in a single moment, but through decades of military overreach, economic disintegration, political usurpation, and the gradual integration of barbarians into the vacuum left by Rome's exhaustion. The Western Empire's fall was thus both abrupt and protracted, a complex interweaving of internal rot and unstoppable external pressures that transformed the Mediterranean world forever. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire survived, and in many ways thrived, for another millennium. Retaining core Roman institutions, but evolving in language, culture, and religion, Byzantium navigated shifting geopolitical landscapes to become the direct heir of Roman statecraft. In 527, Justinian I ascended the throne, determined to reconquer lost western provinces and codify Roman law. His generals, Belisarius and Narses, reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals by 534 and Italy from the Ostrogoths by 554, though these conquests proved costly and transient. Simultaneously, Justinian commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis, a monumental codification that distilled centuries of Roman legal tradition into institutions, digesta, codex, and novelli. These texts preserved Roman jurisprudence for future generations, profoundly influencing European legal systems. Justinian's architectural legacy includes the Hagia Sophia, rebuilt after the Nika Revolt in 537, which combined innovative engineering with opulent decoration to symbolize imperial glory and Orthodox Christianity's triumph. His ambitious building campaign, funded by increased taxation and manpower draft, also constructed aqueducts, bridges, hospitals, and fortifications from Antioch to Ravenna. However, Justinian's grand vision strained the empire's resources. The Justinianic plague between 541 and 542 decimated perhaps one-third of Constantinople's population and crippled economic activity. Simultaneously, renewed Persian hostilities in the east demanded diversion of troops from the Balkans, leaving the Danube frontier vulnerable to Slavic and Avar incursions. From the 7th century onward, Byzantium faced the Arab conquests. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa fell rapidly to Muslim armies between 634 and 642, transforming the empire into a primarily Mediterranean power. In response, the theme system reorganized the military and civil administration. Soldier settlers received land in return for military service, creating a self-sustaining local defense. This adaptation underpinned Constantinople's survival during centuries of Arab blockade and naval raids. Culturally, Byzantium flourished in the iconoclastic controversies between 726 and 843. Emperor Leo III's ban on religious images aimed to curb wealth draining to monasteries and to address perceived divine displeasure. The iconoclast period sparked fierce theological and artistic debates. Ultimately, the triumph of orthodoxy in 843 restored icon veneration, shaping Eastern Orthodox spirituality and ecclesiastical art. During the Macedonian Renaissance from 867 to 1025, under emperors like Basil I and Basil II, the empire reconquered parts of the Balkans, consolidated its legal code in the Basilica, and enjoyed an artistic revival. The empire's economy expanded through trade with Venice and the Rus, minting the solidus gold coin that became the Mediterranean's premier currency. Yet Western entanglements, particularly the Fourth Crusade of 1204, devastated Constantinople. Crusaders diverted from the Holy Land sacked the city, establishing the Latin Empire. Byzantine successor states, Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, vied for legitimacy. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople, but the recovery proved hollow. The city's walls and economy lay in ruin, and the empire was but a shadow of its former self. In the face of rising Ottoman power, Byzantium endured through diplomacy and strategic marriages, but slowly ceded territory. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453, under Mehmed II, marked the definitive end of Roman imperial continuity. Yet Byzantine legacies survived. Orthodox Christianity persisted in the Balkans and Russia. The preserved corpus of ancient Greek and Roman texts fostered the Renaissance in Western Europe, and Byzantine artistic and architectural forms influenced Ottoman and later Eastern Christian cultures. Thus, the Eastern Empire, rechristened Byzantium only by later historians, served as a cultural, legal, and religious bridge between antiquity and the medieval world. Its capacity for administrative innovation, strategic adaptation, and ecclesiastical patronage enabled survival through waves of conquest and crisis, leaving indelible marks on law, theology, art, and statecraft that continue to resonate across Europe and the Near East. Thank you for joining Ancient Odyssey on our sweeping voyage through Rome's epic transformation. From its legendary founding on 7 hills, through republican glory and imperial grandeur, to the West's fall and the enduring legacy of Byzantium. We've witnessed how institutions rose, evolved, and ultimately adapted to Christianity, shaping Western civilization for millennia. If you've enjoyed this odyssey across 2 millennia, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into history's hidden chapters. Until our next expedition, stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring the legacies that continue to define our world.